Hello, my name is Robert Ackerman, and I'm the author of the book Perfect Daughters. It's been a privilege to belong to the company and to belong to HCI, the journey of trying to help so many people, and particularly people who've come from dysfunctional families, addicted families, or whatever. Several years ago, I wrote a book called Perfect Daughters, Adult Daughters of Alcoholics. I have to say that initially, I was petrified to write the book, but my feelings and my reasons to write that book were very, very strong. I thought, to be honest with you, that the Children of Alcoholics movement in the United States, the adult children's movement, really owed its allegiance to women, because it was women who were really willing to talk about their hopes, their dreams, their fears. It's women who really started to put the first support groups together. And it was daughters of alcoholics who really started to look out still for young children of alcoholics. So with that, I really thought, wow, there should be a book on daughters of alcoholics. And so I decided to go ahead and risk and see if I could put this book together, being a guy. Daughters of Alcoholics, obviously, I started to call them Perfect Daughters. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about what's in the book. It has been incredibly successful. And I think the number one reason is certainly coming back to me is so many women said, I just felt like you were writing just to me, or I felt like you really understood what was happening in my life, in the way I grew up, and some of the things that I have today that are very positive, and also the things that I'm struggling with. What I did in the revised edition is I took some of the letters that Perfect Daughters had sent me, and there were so many letters, but in the revised edition, I made that the first chapter. I thought, what would women like to hear? What would other Perfect Daughters like to hear about women who shared their experiences? So that was one of the big changes and one of the additions to the revised edition of the book. Perfect Daughters, if you will, there were 1,208 women involved in this project, just one guy, me, and what it boiled down to was not to be a writer or a researcher or even to be an adult child myself. What it really boiled down to was my ability to listen to what the women had to say, and hopefully I did a good job of that. One of the first things is that I have to tell you is that the book is a comparison, and it compares women who came from dysfunctional or addicted families to women who came from more functional families. So it kind of looks at both of those. One of the really interesting things I think about the book, and one of the things that I try to do in a lot of my work, is to have an appreciation for gender differences. I don't mean to dichotomize everything. I don't think men are from Niagara Falls and women are from Tampa, Florida. But I do think that if we have an appreciation for gender, we can get to a lot of the issues that bother people a lot quicker. And that was very true with Perfect Daughters. And one of the things that I really looked at in Perfect Daughters and wrote about was, is there a difference, for example, for a daughter of an alcoholic mother as opposed to, say, a daughter of an alcoholic father? And sure enough, as I listened to the women and as I looked at all the stuff that was shared, there were some incredible differences between them. For example, not just those statistics or things like that, but I observed right away that daughters who had alcoholic mothers talked about their mothers much more directly. They were more, quote unquote, attacking in the way they talked about their moms. They held their moms accountable, for the addiction. They talked about the fact that the role model really wasn't that good. And they also admitted in certain circumstances that, there was some real anger in them over what was going on. But daughters of alcoholics alcoholic fathers was really interesting. And that is, no matter how many different things and inappropriate things their father did, what I found the most for daughters of alcoholics is that they talked about their fathers from a defensive point, if you will. Still defending dad, not really willing to say too much about, it's dad, etc. But on the other hand, there was a little bit of inconsistency. When I asked and looked back, for the women, how old were you when you were willing to admit to yourself that, geez, dad's alcoholic, mom's alcoholic? Well, the average age was a little over age 14. But if it was their dad, even though they were defensive, they were more likely to admit this to themselves when they were about 12. But if it was their mom, They didn't admit it until they were around 19. So lots of different issues, as we might really understand, between having an alcoholic mom and an alcoholic father. What were some of the really strong issues that many of the women struggled with? Kind of like personality characteristics. I really wanted to get into those and to listen to see what was happening. And let me give you a couple as an example. Certainly the strong feeling of being isolated, that no one really understood her, no one really understood what she was living with, and her sense of isolation. And what did that do? That really led to keeping everything to herself, not really expressing what she wanted to say, and in a lot of cases too, not sticking up for herself. And this really got to this point that so many of the perfect daughters, one of the things that really was strong for them was a tremendous sense of self-condemnation, being very, very difficult on themselves. And we also heard a little bit about perfectionism. We hear that, oh, maybe you're a perfectionist, I need to be a perfectionist. But you know what was really behind perfectionism? It was the women's thinking, am I good enough to be loved? Am I good enough to be loved? And in all this chaos and in all these different things, if I just do things perfectly, maybe I'll be good enough to be loved. And that really got to another very strong issue for many of the women. And that had to do with what I call control needs. The disproportionate need for control. I don't know about you, but living in an addicted family, living in an alcoholic family, really was living in a situation that's out of control. And that the best we could do, and the best that many women said, is they attempted to be counter-controllers. But they were never really in control, because let's face it, if they were in so much control, these women would have got their parents sober a long time ago. But a disproportionate need for control. And the other thing that many women talked about was a disproportionate need for approval. Doing many things so that she would get approval, and ironically, the approval often of the person who was addicted. The other thing that was real strong is a lot of the perfect daughters talked about, I had just as many issues with my non-alcoholic parent as I had with my alcoholic parent. But a lot of the women said this, trying to get a handle on the issues with my non-alcoholic parent was much more difficult. With the alcoholic one, well, there's alcoholism, isn't there? There's kind of an understanding why she was doing this or whatever. But with my non-alcoholic parent, some days you could admit what was going on, some days it was pretending that this really didn't even happen. So a lot of inconsistency. Probably the most dominant theme throughout all of my work, and the dominant theme in Perfect Daughters, really came down to relationships, absolutely and positively. The implications and the impact on relationships. And that was, many of the women would say to me, for example, we hear it so often, I don't know what's wrong with me. I always pick the wrong person. I just picked the wrong person. And as I listened to many of the women say the pain that it's caused about picking the wrong person, a question that I had back to many of them is, just what makes you so sure that you picked them? Okay? Maybe what happened, that they needed someone to put up with their inappropriate behavior. They needed somebody to tolerate the things that happened. And you came along and, wow, you got a PhD in tolerance of inappropriate behavior. I think the other thing that was really strong here, and that was why many of the women were picking high-risk partners. And the reason is that perhaps the women didn't realize that they themselves were high-risk people. They were high-risk women. And what makes a woman very high risk in relationships is not knowing or understanding what are healthy relationships, what are positive relationships, and what it means to get your needs met as well. And I think those were some of the things about relationships that were very strong. Another thing that came up, and I hope that it was in the book, I hope I came across well enough, it was parenting. And so many of the women talked about the struggles and the challenges of parenting. I remember one woman saying, she said, I always wanted to be a mother, everything, I really wanted to be a mother, but I'm afraid to have kids because I just might mess them up. Wow. So the idea of parenting, very, very strong for many of the women, and wanting to be, a good mother, but at the same time saying the role models that I observed did not prepare me well enough to be a healthy parent, and I need to go out and I need to learn some things about being a healthy parent. And finally, what I'd like to mention to you, and why I even did this, is the idea of recovery. I believe more than anything else that people coming from an addicted family, one of the things, it takes us a long time to understand that, but to the women, you have a right to recovery. You have a right to happiness and joy. You have a right to get beyond and transcend those things from childhood. No, we don't need to ignore them. We don't need to think that, oh, this never happened. But many of the women today who are feeling very, very good about themselves, one of the things that they have said over and over, and I tried so hard, to put it in the book, is to incorporate all of the experiences of her life. It was so difficult to say, I want to be a healthy, fully functioning person, when she said, I'm denying part of who I am. The idea is not to deny any of the parts. And as the women so adeptly shared, the best thing for me today now is to integrate all the experiences of my life into my recovery. That's who I am. And what was amazing, and what so many of the women shared today, was the fact that they were saying, I am healthy today, I am recovering today, and I really, really, I love myself. Thanks for listening. And I hope you get as much out of this book as I did in writing it. Thank you.